Yep, we're ready.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Welcome to this 12th roundtable organized by the Just Governance Group about shifting the power in evaluations. We aim to explore how feminists and the colonial approaches can reframe power dynamics in evaluation practice. And we have organized this roundtable in two parts because we know the importance of the event. So we decided to split it into two parts. The first part, which we will be discussing today is about the feminist approach in evaluation, how we can implement it in practice. And the next week, at the same time, using the same link and at the same hour, we will be discussing about how the colonial approaches can be implemented also in evaluation processes. So just some disclosure before we start the conversation. You can put your camera on if possible to see your faces. I mean, if you don't want us to see your faces, that's okay as well, but that will create an intimate atmosphere in the discussion. You can edit your names as you want them to show up or as you want us to call you. And we ask you to mute yourself so that, but you will have time later to interact with the presenter today. And also we will be video recording this conversation because people have asked before to upload it into YouTube because it's a very good learning resource that we put in the YouTube channel. So please be aware of that. If you agree with that, I mean, you can share you can put your faces in the screen and then you can put your names, but we will be video recording this conversation. So about the roundtable of today, why we decided to do a roundtable on shifting the power. At JGG, we have been doing evaluations, a lot of evaluation in the last 20 years, and we have been struggling with this approach. I mean, the struggling in the sense that there are many ways to do it. There are different principles. We have read a lot of literature on the topic, and we are actually developing a co-praxis, which is a bulletin on feminist evaluation. And that is how we came across Donna. We have read her publications and we found it very, very useful. So we invited her to be part of this conversation. We know that it is a challenge in the sense that we have donors are requesting every time or increasingly for applying principles to shift the power, to give the voices to the vulnerable populations, to give the voices to the direct beneficiaries. And we find it a little bit challenging because normally there is little budget or the time frame for conducting the evaluations are very short. And I guess you might feel identified with the same issue. So we said, how do people do it in practice? And today is an honor to have with us Donna Podems, who will clarify some of these questions. She's the creator of the Feminist Evaluation Model, which comprises around 9 principles to promote women's equality throughout the evaluation process. I think you have heard about her. She's an international recognized evaluation specialist with about 2 decades implementing feminist approaches in evaluations around the world. And she is also the founder of Otherwise, where she puts in practice this methodology. And also she has been a board member of the International Organization for Cooperation in Evaluation and the American Evaluation Association. But before handing the floor to Donna, please let me describe how we will interact as a group during this conversation. First, well, now it's the introduction of the roundtable, and then we will have Donna presenting practical examples and also the feminist approaches or principles that she uses for about 20 minutes. After that, we will have a reflection where she will introduce some questions to explore how all of us implement these approaches, or if we haven't implemented them, how we could implement them. So she has the presentation prepared. And after that discussion, which will last 20 minutes, we will have some key takeaways by Kimberly Insader, the director of the Just Governance Group. And then I will be closing the session. So we have 1 hour in total. Without further delays, I think I will hand the floor to Donna Podems. Donna, it is an honor and a pleasure Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to do the all scary thing of hoping my slides share. Hopefully everybody's seeing those. And I'm going to go ahead and put my video off because I find it very disconcerting to see myself as I'm trying to talk. You guys to the side, there we go. I cannot see when you raise your hands, but please do feel free to put questions in the chat as I move along. Jose Miguel will be noting those and bringing them up towards the end of the discussion. I'm not going to be quite as formal with preconceived ideas of what the questions are. I did come up with a few just to get my brain going, but I really just want to open the floor to all of you after I finish presenting. So that's me, a feminist evaluator, and at times an evaluator who is a feminist. And I do distinguish between the two. I constantly bring my own feminist values into all the evaluation work that I do, but I do not always implement feminist evaluation. So let me talk a little. That was a nice introduction, so I'm going to skip my introduction slide. I'm currently teaching part-time, or I'm a senior fellow at the University of Stellenbosch, and I also oversee master's and PhD students at the University of Johannesburg. I have a few written books and things out there, so please feel free to go check them out. Before I start talking about feminist evaluation, I always like to sort of start by distinguishing between the differences between feminist and gender evaluation. It's a big discussion. When I try to introduce feminist evaluation, people automatically raise their hands. When I describe it, they say, well, that sounds like gender to me. So I want to start with just some basic definitions of how I see it. I know others may see it differently. And then bring in the practical element of why I discuss this. On the left-hand side, you can see we've got something that's gender blind, that's the black circle. And then we move towards different kinds of gender evaluation, gender sensitive ones, which describe, gender responsive, which help you understand, gender transformative, which hope for change, and of course, feminist, which is an activist approach. For me, this is how I see it on a sliding scale. Sorry, I've got like the video of you guys right in the middle of my screen. There we go. In a summary, when you look at these different ones, I like to think of it as like, it's gender sensitive. Whoa, there's people here. It's more than men. Gender responsive. We start to look at why differences exist, and gender transformative, where there's a process and a hope that transformation takes place. This is unfortunately the slightly bit of an older version of the model that I'm going to show you at the end. It's just, I've been tweaking some of the words. The book on the actual model comes out the end of this year or early 2025. And this picture is currently with the person who's designing it. But I will go through this model at the end. So just to know, this is where we will end up at the end of our 20 minutes. But sorry, I'm having an issue with my video there. The place I also like to start is, why do people not consider feminist evaluation when they talk about doing an evaluation where we want to shift power? Because those are the kinds of conversations that I find the most useful to have before I introduce feminist evaluation. A lot of times it's because there's confusion about what it is. Sometimes it's because people are offended by the name. And the third reason is that in general, for me and others I've worked with, feminist evaluation tends to not really give you enough direction to show you what to do and how to do it. So let me talk a little bit about the confusion that I often tend to see first. And I want you each in your own mind to think, when I say this word, duck, what mental image comes to your mind? And just hold that mental image there. And I know for some of you, you thought about this lovely white duck. Some of you thought about I think it's called a mallard duck in the middle. And some of you may even have thought about the goose, which is not a duck. So when I have conversations about feminist evaluation, I tend to think that people just do not come to the table with the same understanding or even expectation of what it is. If they bring in a strong gender background, I like to have a conversation about the differences between the two, right? Gender approaches don't challenge women's position. They see women as homogenous, where a feminist approach would absolutely challenge women's subordinate position or would challenge something about the reason why women are not reaching equality in society. A gender approach also, for example, doesn't pull in a lot of the qualitative types of approaches in terms of encouraging evaluators to reflect on their values. They tend to interpret gender as men and women, where a feminist approach would be broader than that, recognizing many other kinds of identities and emphasizing that an evaluator needs to be open and reflexive. I'm zipping through these just to give you an idea of the kinds of conversations that are useful to have if you choose to use a feminist evaluation in your next endeavor. The other challenge we have in feminist evaluation is that people tend to merge the two, right? We've got the donkey, who I've labeled as my gender person, animal. We've got the zebra, brings in the feminist evaluation. And we have a zonkey, which is actually a real live animal, which I would like to own someday. But what happens when you tend to read a lot of the published peer-reviewed articles that are out there on either labeled feminist or labeled gender approaches, most often they're a mix, right? Which really adds to the confusion of what am I reading here? Am I reading this or am I reading that? Or am I reading a combination of the both? So it makes it very difficult sometimes to distinguish between the two. The takeaway message from that, of course, and if any of you are familiar with my Being an Evaluator book, it's a message I repeat over and over, is that as evaluators, we need to use a term or a concept to make sure that everyone is on the same page. It's not about having an argument about my definition's right, but it's about coming to using a collaborative process, which of course is feminist, and agreeing what this label means and how it's going to look in practice. Now, there's certain words out there that there's no conversation around them in deciding what they mean. For example, empirical means empirical. But when we come down to things like feminist evaluation or even evaluation itself, we need to think about and consider how we all view that. I am offended. This is a big one. A lot of times I introduce feminist evaluation and people are already on their back heel before I even move forward with what it is because of the name. And unfortunately, it's a name we have to grapple with. One approach I can use is to ask people, what is it about feminism that makes you feel uncomfortable? Really open up the conversation with them in that way. Ask them what other approaches they prefer and what makes them more suitable to the context. Because I promise you, feminist evaluation is not the gold standard. It's not the be all end all. Sometimes other approaches just might be more appropriate. Okay, so open up the conversation. But something else I like to do is to present facts because everybody likes a quantitative fact. So if someone says to me, it's offensive, or why do we have to do feminist evaluation? I might just pull out a fact out of the back of my pocket and say, well, across a woman's lifetime, 1 in 3 women, which is about 736 million women, are subjected to physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner. So that would make feminist approaches relevant. Or I might say, here's a fact from the UK. While men are 2.4 times more likely to die from COVID-19, women are twice as likely to be killed by their partner in lockdown. That would also suggest that perhaps a feminist approach to evaluation or looking at an intervention might be a good idea. Maybe I'll just throw one at them from Europe. I happen to be working in that area, that 2,300 women are killed every year at the hands of their partners or ex-partners, male partners. 45 women a week are killed by those who supposedly love them. 1 in 3 women have suffered physical and or sexual violence, and 1 in 2 have experienced sexual harassment since the age of 15. And those are from 2024. But perhaps the fact that we don't seem to be moving forward sometimes with just keeping women safe might be a reason to use feminist evaluation. This stat's quite old, but it's one I was born in the States, one that really shocked me when I read it, is thinking about the fact that American women serving in Iraq or Afghanistan at that time were more likely to be raped by a comrade than killed by an enemy. So if I'm going in to use feminist evaluation in a particular area, because I think it's appropriate, some of the things to think about are what are the stats or what are thematic areas that are useful for you to talk about in that context that might make an impact on someone for talking about why you need to use feminist evaluation. So let me get to the case study. There's several case studies that I have online. This one is also online, so you can go check it out after if you want some more detail. But about a year ago, we published this, and it was a gender platform of the platform evaluation. We use a feminist approach, but the platform itself was called Gender. It was the gender platform. And it was the CGIAR platform. And basically, this is a global agricultural organization that works on improving different kinds of agriculture around the world, right? Feeding people. And it was divided up, and you can see on the right, into 3 different areas. It was quite a large evaluation. And the job of the platform was to make sure that information got out there to all the different aspects of doing agricultural research, infusing gender. Okay, that's it in a nutshell. We had quite an extensive team, and I would be remiss not to just flash them up there because they all did such an amazing job. And I'll get into the competencies of implementing the FEM in a moment, but just keep this slide in the back of your mind. Okay. So how did using feminist evaluation to evaluate the gender platform shift power? Because that's what we're talking about today. And I think even that whole idea of what shifting power looks like can be quite gray. What does shifting power look like? Right? Well, for us, it looked like shifting systems. It looked like shifting how people think. It looked like shifting budgets. It looked like shifting an international organization from not really putting gender on the table to at least getting us to the table. So how did we do that? 3 ways. We had early engagement with multiple levels. You're going to say, well, that's participatory. Absolutely. But what we focused on as feminist evaluators is to ensure that we were reaching the women, particularly, who are not often having a voice in this process that had to do with gender, for example. We made sure that knowledge construction varied widely. So what we made sure is that different kinds of people believe in different kinds of data. As evaluators, we need to think about 3 levels of quality of data, of course. We need to think that our data itself is credible, right? Qualitative, quantitative, they have their own standards. We need to make sure that the evidence that we gathered was credible, and we need to make sure that the evaluation was credible. And this meant that different user groups had different understandings of what that meant, meaning that our methodology was pretty complicated. And finally, we made sure that we had strong action-based recommendations. And from a feminist position, we co-developed all of the recommendations based on the evidence that we had developed. So where did that leave us? And just to give you an idea, this is not the entire report or all of the recommendations. Our recommendations were really focused on shifting power. We focused on strengthening partnerships, different kinds of partnerships, where those partnerships existed, who had a voice in them. We've jumping to number 3 and number 4, how the results were tracked, who they were tracked for, what results showed up, not just the results about people, but about women and about how that influenced agriculture and so on. So we made sure that those data, which often fell to the bottom or were not collected at all, were collected. And you can see that CGIAR, as the international organization, fully accepted these kinds of recommendations. But we weren't 100% successful, of course. On the left, you can see where we really pushed at power, where we really pushed at, timeframes that were being given to these organizations, to these groups out trying to implement their activities. They had a 1-year planning and research timeframe to create an impact. This is impossible, right? So we pushed hard on that to get that changed. We got that partially accepted. We pushed hard on budgets. We pushed back on the actual donors of the CGIAR. We actually had meetings with them. We showed them empirical data. We gave logical reasoning. And not just me, this was bringing in people from the field, people from different organizations. We all presented together, again, part of the feminist approach. We got some of the budget Ideas shifted, but of course, not all of them. And we also pushed for getting resources expanded for the gender platform, partially accepted, and getting the gender team to the table where the management decisions were being made. We were not as successful in that. So again, even though we used a feminist approach, we were successful in some ways and not successful in others. I use that as a very quick case study because I wanted to move on to talk about how, in general, feminist evaluation doesn't really tell us what to do. And it leaves a lot of people wondering, how do I even move forward with feminist evaluation? So, with the model, there's a chapter that came out in 2024. I've published a few other articles on it as well, but the final one will be coming out, as I mentioned, early next year. The idea of the feminist evaluation model is that we need to bring in, if you're doing feminist evaluation, you need to bring in four areas of knowledge. And I think feminist evaluation tends to be very weak in how it approaches the top, construction of knowledge. We don't talk about it a lot. We're very flimsy on it. We tend to be anyway. On the right, the ideals of feminism, people don't necessarily understand them, the core ideals of feminism. Um, on the bottom, we are evaluation practitioners. We might be activists, we might be feminists, but at the core, we're being hired because we're evaluators and we need to understand the theory and practice of evaluation. And on the left, the principles that have been used in feminist evaluation, I have found in practice very difficult to implement. Theoretically, I understand them, but implementing them is different. So this model takes all four of these areas and brings them into one. On the bottom, you can see most evaluation models do not say what kind of competencies you need to implement them. This model is saying that you need to bring in these kinds of knowledge and skill areas in order to successfully implement the model. Doesn't mean you personally, that's a lot. As I showed you, it was a huge team that we had for the CGIAR example, and collectively, we brought in these kinds of skills. So going back to the evaluation theory, and you can see people falling asleep there. I know it's not the most exciting topic in the world for some people, but really understanding different kinds of evaluation theory. The FEM model built on realist evaluation. It built on outcome mapping. It built on utilization-focused evaluation. If you understand these different kinds of evaluation theories, when you look at the FEM model, you know how to alter it, change it, make it so that it's most useful for you in your context. But at the end of the day, it's an evaluation theory. We need to understand evaluation. Knowledge construction and how knowledge is constructed is much more than someone saying, hey, we'd like a survey. The discussion goes so much deeper than that to really understanding what people believe is a fact, what people think is credible, understanding how women get left out of statistics that are out there in general, being able to be critical of how knowledge is actually constructed. So being able to have that conversation and that knowledge moving into an evaluation for the feminist evaluation model is critical. Bringing in and understanding what feminist ideals are, right? Being able to explain to someone that, for example, feminism isn't pushing that men and women are the same. It's asking that we're equal. It's different. So being able to have those kinds of conversations with people is very important. The feminist principles themselves are what guided us through the entire model. And the overall principle, I'll just read the bold part, is to use evaluation to support transformational change for women that paves the way for gender equality. And some of the biggest pushback I get right here when I present the model at conferences and other academic areas is, why women? Right? Why are you just focusing on women? And I have a few answers for that. Sometimes I go back to my statistics, but also there's over 100, there's 101 documented ways to do evaluation. And not one single one of them focuses only on women. So I think it's okay that we take 1% of the space for this approach. It's supported by 9 principles, which I'm not going to go into today, but I'll certainly take questions around them. They are actionable. In the book, each principle has its own chapter with explaining how to use it, what it could mean in different contexts, and so on. Each chapter pulls on different kinds of theory to support it. So, for example, if we're looking at, let's pull one out here. Like number 5, co-identify the source of power dynamics that support inequities and work to reduce those inequities through the evaluation process. I really looked at all different kinds of theory coming out of anthropology, coming out of sociology, for example, that I think make this principle stronger. So I didn't just rely on a feminist type of theory or background. I searched wide and far to find the literature that would make these feminist principles stronger. And to just end, and I'm hoping I'm ending on time, again, just to go back to the competencies it takes to implement the feminist evaluation model, I think we're always a bit reticent to say what they are. As you know, if you're involved in evaluation, you know there's a big discussion around the world. A lot of evaluation associations and societies have come out with different kinds of competencies. So I'm not saying anything new or different here than what most of these associations and societies are saying. But what I am putting forth is to say, to do this model, you need someone who can facilitate. You need someone who is comfortable with activism. You need someone who knows how to negotiate, which is different than facilitating, right? You need someone who knows how to educate. Need someone who's a very good communicator. Um, and you need someone who can advocate, right? So advocate being different than activism. Advocate, you're taking something and you're putting it forward. Activism, you're actually trying to shift the system. These definitions, of course, don't work in everyone's context, and that's okay. Just make sure before you start implementing the FEM, if you choose to use it, that you're very, very clear on what these words mean in your context. For example, some people intermix activism and advocating. That's okay. Make sure you have someone on your team that can do what you expect them to do at the end of the day. So that is a whirlwind through the feminist model. Quick look at how it's been used and the reasons and how you would go about introducing it if you choose to use it to shift power in your evaluative process. And like pass back over to my co-host because we're collaborating.
Thank you very much, Donna. This was a very enlightening presentation. For now, what we will do is a collective reflection. And the idea is that we reflect upon challenges that we have faced while conducting evaluations, right? And particularly while implementing feminist evaluations. So I don't know, Donna, if you have questions for the audience or the audience have questions for you, that will be great. I think that all of us have had challenges in making sure that the voices of women are equally incorporated into the evaluation processes. I think we have all have challenges in understanding or making sure that the short evaluation periods are, like promoting actually feminist evaluations when we try to implement it. So let's reflect upon that. And I don't know, whoever wants to step in and pose a question, or Donna, if you have questions for the audience about particular challenges, please go ahead. This is a floor for everyone. And it will be great if you unmute yourself when you want to make a comment, or also if you want to put the questions on the chat, that's also good.
I saw a hand go up, but then it disappeared on my side.
Hi, Donna. This is Alpakshi.
Hi.
So I wanted to ask you, is there a difference, or how do you see the difference, or is the book detailing out the difference when you apply this model in the global north and the global south?
The book goes into, for example, in explaining feminism, for example, it goes through different kinds of examples. India being one of the examples, I used to juxtapose the examples from the United States and their approach to feminism. So what I've tried to do in the book is to give different perspectives and different voices from around the world, Latin America, Africa, mostly Southeast Asia, and so on in the book to give different perspectives of what they think and how they understand feminism. How you apply it, though, is why I went for the principle approach, because the principles provide guidance. They don't tell you what to do, right? It's not steps. They guide you. And within each principle, I pulled on different kinds of theories and different examples from around the world. So really it's up to you to contextualize the principles and make them work for you in your context.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else? Or I will just put one question out there because I think is something, well, at least from my perspective, important is how do we truly ensure that the voices of women and marginalized groups are not just included, but truly heard and respected in the evaluation process? Because that is what we aim. And normally that is one of the principles. So it's not just having women in the workshop and opining or providing their opinions, but how do we, and say, okay, we included women, but how do you truly capture that in the evaluation? I think that's one of the challenge, and principally respected it. And how to make sure that they help us build the data, right, that we need. I think that's very complicated given the time frame. So if anyone can reflect upon that, that'll be very helpful for me.
I'll just jump in quickly because I think one of my principles gets at that, and it's around the knowledge construction principles. One of the things that drives me absolutely mad when I read participatory evaluation, collaborative evaluation, all of those ones out there, is I always read them and I think, just because you invite someone to a workshop doesn't mean you're actually participating, right? So I think one of the biggest steps in the FEM is around your responsibility, meaning the evaluator's responsibility to break down words, to talk about words, to talk about processes, to make sure everyone's on the same page. Hey, we're here to do an evaluation. What does that mean? At the end of the day, what is this supposed to look like? We're asking a question. What does that mean? We have to get empirical data. What is empirical? So many times I sit in a workshop that's participatory, and I'm sure that 50% of the people in the room don't know what's going on to the extent that they can jump up and really participate in that conversation. Sometimes people toss words around and I don't know what they mean. And I have to admit that I sit back and go, should I raise my hand or should I just be quiet in the back? All right. So I think it is, with my own experience of feeling like I don't know what's going on sometimes, it is the job of the evaluator to make sure that people understand words, that they understand concepts, that they understand the process, that they have the right, just like when we do, when you interview someone, you say you have the right to, stop this interview at any time, that you also do that in a participatory process. You don't need to be here the whole time. If you're going to contribute the first 5 minutes and you have stuff to do, that's fine. So being able to negotiate those kinds of rules and not just run a workshop the standard way we run a workshop with a PowerPoint, or the standard way that we run a participatory process. I think it's so much deeper and so much more than that. And it is definitely a chapter I go into on my book because I feel very passionate about what real participation actually looks like and whether or not people actually want to participate. People are busy. They're hiring me as an evaluator to do my job. So they might think that me inviting them to a data workshop to help me interpret my data is actually putting my workload onto them. Right? So think really carefully about how you get people and how people want to participate to make sure that their voices are heard. That's my little soapbox. Actually, I have quite a few, but that's one of them.
Thank you so much.
Barbara put her hand up.
Hi, Donna. Thank you as always.
Hey, Barbara.
Such an interesting presentation. I have a follow-up question. The big issue I'm grappling with at the moment, I'm trying to think about and write about, is the tension between people saying they're doing this and actually being willing to do it. And you've kind of put your name on that, and you're so good at dealing with contradiction. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that. For example, I'll have a client whose terms of reference have the word feminist and the word participation all over the document. But when it comes to talking about, well, how do we go about doing this? Who do we want to have involved? Suddenly the client says, well, people are really busy. We don't want to impinge too much on their time, including the client themselves.
Yeah.
And part of me thinks, well, okay, that's fine, but then please let's not call it this. Let's call it something else. I just wonder, is this a common experience? I feel like with so much to do with power, people love the words, but I'm not that sure that people can really want to do it. And then all I can do is say, well, we see a tension here, and how do you want to play that? But anyway, any comments on that?
I agree, and I share your experience. Absolutely. It's hard when people say like pushing power, changing power, shifting power. What does that look like? I think the CGIAR, the example that I gave was great because there were people in powerful positions that were willing to stick their neck out, right?
Mm.
Uh, and did a fantastic job standing up. But if you don't have the people at the very top buying into what it really means,
Mhm.
there's not much we can do as an external. I don't know. I'm not an internal evaluator, but there's not much we can do as external evaluators. We can push a bit. We
Mhm.
want a feminist evaluation. What does that look like to you?
Mm.
Right? That's the question.
Mm.
And then when they name it and it doesn't really look like that, you could say, well, that's really not how I would label that, but okay, let's move forward. I mean, I think one of the ways I deal with it, and for those of you who don't know, I was a student of Michael Quinn Patton years ago. And so I'm a big fan and got to know him through his utilization focused evaluation, which has gone from like 7 steps to 21 steps back to 16 steps, whatever it's gone over. It's got a lot of steps. And I have always found that impossible to implement every single step in UFE. I agree with it, but it's impossible. And I think the same thing with a feminist evaluation shifting power is to pick your low-hanging fruit, pick your thing that you think you can shift and shove everything else aside. Because I think that's, if we get one little thing done,
Mhm.
I think that's a success. Yeah, but Barbara, I share your experiences.
Oh, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Please go ahead if you have more questions or experiences that you want to share. I think this is
Yeah,
the opportunity to reflect.
I would love to hear some of the experiences of the people in the audience.
I think Liva before said that she completely agree with Barbara.
Yeah, it's more of a sad note. I think it's the same experience. I was working on the first feminist evaluation and putting this in quotes, and they threw in, co-develop this and co-develop the tools, and we're gonna collaborate on this. And I was, so excited. And then when it actually came to doing that, I was like, oh no, we don't have time. Just send us the data collection tools and we'll give you comments. And I said, no, but that's not co-creating. That's just your regular way of sending
Yeah.
tools and you guys giving us feedback. And as much as they, wanted to maybe do a feminist evaluation, their systems just were not in place to be able to support it. But then they continued, throwing it out there like it was their first feminist evaluation. And nothing in it was in fact feminist. Like we weren't able to actually do that were in fact feminist. And so it was a lot of eye rolling and so I hear you, Barbara, because it's a big struggle. And it's the same thing when we hear about things being gender transformative and people trying to do, and like, well, you can't do that in 3 years. And anybody who says who can doesn't understand really what gender transformative looks like. And
Yeah.
so all I see, I feel your pain and I feel your struggle. And it's also finding a fine line of where do we push them to think about these things and push the limits, and then where do we have to say, okay, there's not much we can do as evaluators.
Thank you so much, Liva. Niraj, it is also a pleasure to have you here. Please go ahead.
Hi, Miguel. Yes, it's great to hear this. And first of all, my apologies, I was a little bit late, and also have internet connectivity issues, so it might drop off in case that happens. And apologies for that. I completely agree with the point that was made about that it's like try to figure out the low-hanging fruit and try to incorporate those ones which are most relevant and can be used in the evaluation process. But I was wondering if there is a kind of a capability approach where there can be some guidance in terms of in case we are looking at resource constraints or capability constraint evaluation process, then which is the most important bit that we should consider to incorporate, and then progressively, if we have more resources and more capability, then what would be the next level of fruit, or next level, lowest level hanging fruit that we should be aiming for. So is there some guidance on this one that might be there in the book or anywhere else that we can look? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. So the 9 principles, the initial 3 principles start off really with when you're conceptualizing feminist evaluation. So it starts with contracting. So I would say it really depends on where you come into the process. So for example, if you're saying you're going to do a feminist evaluation, I can tell you, and I'm quite forthright about this, when I'm hired as a feminist evaluator or a gender evaluator, I'm paid less than when I'm hired as an impact evaluator, an outcome, you name it. I'm paid more, except when I'm called a feminist evaluator or a gender evaluator, except the Canadians. Bless the Canadians. They pay me the same for theirs. But everybody else pays me significantly less. So why don't we start there? If you're someone that can influence the contracting process, start pushing in from the inside. Why are we paying our gender team less than we're paying our economists? I'm bringing in a PhD, I'm bringing in books, I'm a professor, but I'm paid less than the economist who has a master's degree and 5 years experience. So if you're in that side of the issue, let's push there. Let's get those pay rates fair. So I think it's really kind of understanding where you have the power to make a difference in the process. And also, I have to be really honest. Although I teach at universities, my major income is as a consultant. So I also need to be careful, right, to not irritate people too much, because I am dependent on contracts. So I think I also want to just be careful about how you push. For those of you who are dependent on your consulting income.
Anyone else? Any comment, any question?
I have an example from an evaluation that a Just Governance Group team did a couple of years ago in Iraq. So the donor wanted some feminist consideration there, it was Canadian. So, the Feminist International Assistance policy. But when it came down to it, operating in a fragile context, and moving around in the country and in the Kurdish area, and trying to engage women, it was challenging. So what we ended up, I felt like it was just, maybe this is the answer to the low-hanging fruit, or what we could figure out in that time was in a certain areas, we were able to work with women and do some orientation and discussion with them. And then they did some peer interviewing. And I think gathered data that maybe our team, international and national evaluators, may not have gathered. And that was sort of the only line through that we were able to do. And it was also complex. It was 4 projects being evaluated under sort of a program type evaluation on gender and governance. So it was really challenging. And then I think we've been frustrated because we want to have a fully feminist evaluation approach, and we never get there. We don't get the time, the resources, the understanding of whoever's financing. So that was just some of the experience that we've had recently.
think one of the reasons, so this model has emerged over about 9 years. So if some of you Google me and you see my approach, you'll see that it used to be just principle focused. And the model shifted over the past couple of years, working with the Canadians, working with CGIAR and others, to include the knowledge areas. Because first and foremost, we're evaluators. So if someone asked me to come in and do a feminist evaluation, my first question is, what are your questions? Like, what do you actually want to learn? Because the questions I need to understand, they drive my methods, right? Who are your users of this evaluation, right? So there I'm pulling on, patent. Who are the users for this? What do you want to understand what affects who, where, why, and how? And pulling on a realist approach, right? So that evaluation knowledge that sits in our brains or should sit in our brains is what we're using to then say, right, this question, one question of 7 questions that you have actually would benefit from a feminist approach in this way, and this is why. And I do think that lays on our shoulders to explain back to people, actually 6 out of 7, no, this is a gender approach, this is an outcome mapping, this is whatever it is, right? But this particular question, we can nail this with a feminist approach, and it's going to give you better data and credible to these people. So I think in our inception reports or in our initial discussions, it lays on us to have that evaluation knowledge, that understanding of knowledge construction beyond feminist principles.
Thank you so much, Donna, and everyone for this interesting conversation. Now it's time to move to the key takeaways, and for that I will hand the floor to Kimberly Insader, who is the director of the Just Governance Group. Please, Kimberly, go ahead.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. The shifting the power, I think in our, as Miguel said at the beginning, has been a challenge at times to do that. So I really, I picked up on some things that I think were really important that Donna highlighted, is that the different competencies. So if you're a consultant and you're reading terms of reference that look at feminist evaluation, want to put a critical eye, I think, to the questions, as Donna just mentioned. Make sure your team, I found that interesting, the different competencies, because I wouldn't have thought of all those competencies. Yes, you have evaluation competencies, but you need all of these other competencies. And looking at how to really apply different methods to suit the context you're in seem so important. But I think if we're really focusing on shifting the power, what I could understand is that really breaking things down in smaller components. Really, this is probably where some education and looking at how knowledge is constructed, and we really break that down. And so we can really engage women, I guess, as well as men, but with the understanding that we're looking for transformational change for women. I mean, those are some of the things that stood out to me. I think one of the challenges that seems to come across and what the questions or comments people were making is who's the client and what's their understanding of feminist evaluation, and are they putting some funds that help women be engaged? That's one of the things we found difficult. So if we're going to ask women to come to workshops or do these sense-making exercises, how are they being supported so that they can attend? I think that's one of that's sort of the wrap up, and we're going to look next week at other issues around decolonizing. Miguel?
Thank you very much. Donna, you want to do some final, to make some final comments?
I just want to thank people for coming. I know sometimes it's hard to put the time aside. I want to thank your group for inviting me, Just Governance Group for inviting me to have a platform to talk about feminist evaluation. Just to say, when I first submitted my first approach to feminist evaluation about 15 years ago, it was rejected by one of the top journals because they said that it wasn't relevant to the evaluation community. So we've come a long way. And I just want to say, some of you mentioned they asked for feminist evaluation and don't want to do it. Well, thank goodness they're even using the term. So I think there are these little wins that are happening. So I'm just really glad to hear about that.
Thank you very much, Donna. I have, I think, two comments which are related to what you are saying, and also Kimberly. And I think I found very interesting what you said, that there is not enough direction on what to do and how to implement the feminist evaluation approach. I think this was even worse, like maybe 5 years ago, when at least I came across this approach, and we struggled to understand it. And then we identified some principles here and there, and we were able to put together one evaluation, which actually was successful, but we struggled. So hopefully there are more people who are producing this type of resources for us to rely on and actually implement it. I think the other thing that I learned when you said is about the questions. The questions should be feminist focused. Otherwise, there won't be any method that you can implement to answer those questions. But also what I found very interesting when you presented the recommendation is that the recommendations are about shifting the power themselves. Is that you don't lose the track from the questions to the recommendations. And in the recommendations is where you have the opportunity to make an attempt to shift the power, right, to the users of the evaluation. I found that very interesting. And yeah, thank you very much, Donna, for this presentation. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your experiences. I think just to conclude, it's just a reminder about the roundtable next week at the same time, using the same link. And we will be discussing how the colonial approaches can also be used to shifting the power in evaluations. And at the end of that presentation, hopefully Donna can be with us, but if she can't, we will have other team members that will be during the discussions. We will also reflect upon the two approaches to conclude that roundtable. And for that presentation, with us will be Serge Eric, who has a lot of experience also working in this area of the colonial approaches. So thank you, everyone, for being with us. I hope to see you next week. Please keep us in mind and put it in your calendar. Same hours, same link, and bye-bye.